Hello and welcome to another episode of Chatting with Slava the Jordanian at the Mindset Mastery Moments. Today, we are going to take you on a journey through the Arab history with science. And I'm so excited about this episode because I have a special guest. Probably you guys have met him before. We did an episode with him about Egyptian immigrants, an American Egyptian immigrant, Dr. Ihab Abderrahim. So without further ado, let's just plunge right in. And I want to let you guys know that we did some research and we have fascinating information and fascinating facts and data to share with you today. The purpose of this episode is to help you guys understand the connection and the motivation and the drive of Arabs towards science and their discoveries. And from there on, to let you guys independently make your own judgment of discovering and uncovering the history and, like I said, the bond and the connection between Arabs and the science. So let's begin. So I wrote some facts, which we did some research, and this is what we came up with. According to our research, it all started with ancient civilization of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Arabian Peninsula. These civilizations made significant contribution in fields such as mathematics, medicine, and astronomy. They developed the concept of zero and arithmetic, built the first hospitals and medical schools, and made groundbreaking discoveries in the stars. But it didn't stop there. During the golden age of Islam, starting the 8th century, Arab scholars made tremendous advancements in various fields of science. They translated Greek and Roman texts, built observatories, developed scientific instruments, and made groundbreaking discoveries in fields such as chemistry, physics, and optics. Their contributions did not just stay within their own civilization. They were passed on to other parts of the world and became the foundation for further scientific exploration and development. Then it moves on to saying many Arab and Islamic scientists made groundbreaking contributions that preceded similar discoveries by European scholars. You have any thoughts?
Thank you, Dr. Slava, for having me. Well, my thoughts are, again, growing up here in the United States, you don't hear anything about Arab scholars or scientists or engineers or anything like that. Everything is just about the European scholars from several hundred years ago, all the way up to the more recent ones from the 1900s. So the predecessors I learned from my research, and again, some of the things I learned growing up from my cousin, who's an engineer. He kind of let me know that there's a lot of Arab scientists that preceded the European scientists, and I think it goes unnoticed here in the United States. So it'd be great now to kind of talk a little bit about that. And one of the things I kind of saw in my research, just to start things off, is a lot of these scholars, these European scholars, used to go during the Islamic Golden Age to the Arab countries because that's where the universities were at the time. So those were the advanced universities. So European scholars would go there, learn, and take it back to Europe. So I just wanted to kind of give that kind of starting point. But I'll let you go ahead, Dr. Slava.
No, I mean, that goes back to the statement says they developed the concept of zero and arithmetic, built the first hospitals and medical schools, and made groundbreaking discoveries in the stars. So basically astronomy. I was born in Saudi Arabia. So our schools in Saudi was almost like brainwashing in a good way. We learned all the time, on and on and on. I think starting in 6th grade, we learned about our history, of course, the Islamic Empire and the impact of Muslims and Arab on the advancement of science. So we started in sixth grade, and by high school, we learned about the same scientists over and over again, but they gave us, with every grade, they gave us a little bit more detail, a little bit more background, because obviously if you give us too much when we're younger, we're not going to comprehend that. Plus, we're not going to respect that or admire that or appreciate that. So by the time we got into high school, we were just so enriched with this history and so knowledgeable and so proud of all these achievements. The funny thing is, coming to the West or even visiting the West, there's no mention of it. When you go to the museums and when you go to the heritage establishments and even museums that talks about ancient civilizations, they are mentioned a little bit. They have portrait, but of course, dominantly, it's about what the Western have achieved, which is fine. That's in their own right. They have the right to celebrate themselves, but that's why we're here at the on the podcast or on a social media platform like this one, in order to celebrate our heritage, in order to have a voice to tell our stories and our engagement, our interaction with the information that we got about the heritage and about the accomplishment of these scientists. So we know that they were advanced. We know that the Islamic Empire ruled for just North Africa was 800 years alone. And me and Ihab always talk about how, for example, in Europe, when Europe got hit by the plague, all the territories that were under the Islamic Empire, they were fine. They were healthy. They were clean. They never heard of these diseases, but we'll go over some of the significant figures that actually discovered a lot of this pathology that was decimating the Western world or even Europe or Asia. India, not much in Asia because they did have that Oriental or Eastern also medicine. So Ihab, you came here at 2 years old. Can you help the listener shed a light? I have talked about what I've learned. How was these facts presented to you, and at what point in your education or in your schooling, when did you discover the magnificent discoveries and accomplishment of Islamic Arab scientists? Across of all these discoveries, you have mentioned your cousin who's an engineer that shared this with you, but did you hear about it when you're in school? And if that's a yes, what grade was it? If that's a no, when did you discover it?
I would say it's more of a no. One of the first things you learn is the numbering system here in the United States. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And they tell you it was, these are Arabic numerals. Okay. What does that mean? I asked the teacher. They're like, well, it comes from the Arabs. Okay. But why? And there's a lot of reasons why, because, we went from the Roman numeral system, which doesn't have 0, which is a very important number or non-existent number, really, null, basically. And it's needed for a lot of things, especially for computers, right? They use a binary 0 and 1, for writing code and things like that. That's kind of the basics of computers, but again, nobody really goes beyond saying, oh, these are Arabic numerals. And, even algebra, the word algebra, right? It's kind of, nobody talks about it. Has nothing, like, basically it really doesn't, they don't talk about the Arabs that came up with algebra at the time, but, I learned about it from my cousin who's an engineer who's from Egypt. And it's my dad's first cousin. And so when I talked to him and just talked about what I learned in school, and he would say, oh, this has Arab principles, as an Arab base to it. And so that's a really important, but no, in school, we just kind of gloss over it. And most of the time when we're learning about science, chemistry, engineering, math, whatever it might be, it's always the European scientists. I never heard of Arab scientists in school, ever. So, I think the first time I started hearing about the real Arab scientists is when we the three of us started talking about it. And Yusuf would send some information. I would go in and I'd research it. I'm like, whoa, this was discovered hundreds of years before these Europeans started kind of talking about it or presenting it in their writings. So I really think most of the knowledge I got about the Arab scientists was maybe in the last 6-8 months or so when we all started talking about it.
Wow.
It sounds like you had a really good grasp of it. Dr. Slava, you obviously learned about it in school, but here you do not learn about this in the United States. It's almost like it's non-existent, like as if the Arab and the Islamic scientists didn't exist at all, which is very like interesting and a little bit disturbing because I would think a real scientist like myself, even American, doesn't matter, would love to learn where where all the science and chemistry and math kind of originates from and where these Europeans kind of build upon it, you know? So that's would be really nice to have learned in school because it would have broadened my perspective. So
that is a very interesting point because when I was in Saudi, when we learned about scientists, there was no judgment. It was full inclusivity and no stereotype. We gave them fair share of the spotlight. But of course, you know, as an Arab nation, we went back as far as the Romans, the Greeks, the ancient Egyptians, then the Islamic Empire, then the Western discoveries. So it fascinates me that, and I'm going to ask you, why do you think is that? Because science, and I'm married to a scientist, and my brother is an engineer, and I kind of attract the like-minded people I've been surrounded with all my life. Logic doesn't discriminate. Knowledge does not discriminate. Science does not discriminate. So being a scientist, being an educator, there should be this attitude towards information and facts that's not biased, and it needs to be impartial. And what I'm trying to get to is it's fascinating me that in the Western world, that wasn't the case in Saudi, although I'll let you know, Saudis are very, very proud. But also Islam comes first, then Arabian comes second. So Islam is always first, you know, celebrating Islam, acknowledging Islamic accomplishment, Islamic achievements, Islamic history. Then the second one is the Arab. Being an Arabia, you need to be proud Arab, regardless of your race, background, religion, your beliefs or your values. Arab is an Arab, right? But it's fascinating me how the West had a different attitude. And I'm not sure if this has been always the case, or this is more like the new era of the beginning of the 19th century, or maybe the beginning of the end of 19th century, or the beginning of the 20th century. I don't know if and I'm not trying to be political here, if the colonialism movement, when it happened, in order for them to protect their agenda or their narrative or their purpose or vision, kind of put a damper on anybody else that flourished before them, and kind of, you know, elevated their own achievement in order to convince whoever they're colonizing that we're the best, we're more advanced, forget about the past, just think about the present, think about the future. But again, like I said, science or scientists should not be biased or partial. It needs to be unbiased and needs to be impartial.
In regards to science and knowledge, or?
Yeah, why do you agree with the motive behind suppressing ancient knowledge that's tied up to Arabs and Muslim to satisfy a certain narrative?
Oh yeah, I believe so. Yeah, I mean the colonialism that you were mentioning is very important, and it's almost like, again, they want to suppress the Arab, maybe Hindu. I mean, there's a lot of, it's not just the Arabs. There's the Hindu culture, ancient Chinese. There's a lot of different backgrounds and cultures that really had advanced prior to the Europeans, but it's almost like the Europeans kind of shut that down, and the influence of the West is all that really mattered at the time. But again, it's not like it's hidden. You can go online and do the research, and you can find everything. So that's the great thing about, everything's there. Before,
now, Ihab, when you were in undergrad at Case Western,
yeah.
I mean, I was a chemistry major too. We didn't even learn, or even the history classes that we took. I don't think we took any history classes about Islam and science. But when you went to graduate school, did you guys go back and, with the physical chemistry, analytical chemistry, did you even tie any of your knowledge to the origin of science at all? Was there mention of it?
No.
Nothing at all.
No, nothing at all. So, I mean, you'd learn about whatever science, whatever chemistry you needed to utilize in the lab or whatever you might use, and you just kind of move forward. And nobody really questions and asks like, oh, was this derived from? Oh, well, a lot of the work in my graduate work and my postdoc work is mostly about the science that happened with respect to, in the 1900s into the 2000s. So Albert Einstein, Schrodinger, they're more, talking about, nuclear chemistry, things like that. That wasn't really probably discussed or looked at in the Arab world, I believe. But, some of the older chemistry, when you talk about distillation, crystallization, sublimation, a lot of that organic chemistry, filtration, that comes from, back in the year 700, 750, in the Arab world. So, but yeah, when I was exposed, when you say graduate school and postdoc, most of that work was, talking about electrons and metal surfaces, things like that. So we never, it really didn't go back that far to the year 700, 800, 900. It's mostly the year 1900 or the late 1800s on.
Okay. Yeah. That's fascinating. So, it's time for us to move on and just share with our listeners some of the facts that and the data we got from the research that we have done. So I would like to start with medicine and surgery to have that fact, our listeners, and be the judge of whether I was wowed or was like, yeah, that's not a big deal. I knew this. Medicine and surgery. Al-Zahrawi period was 936 to 1013. Pioneered surgery before European surgeons. Described over 200 surgical tools, many still in use today. Developed early techniques for cauterization, suturing, and lithotripsy, removing bladder stones. That's what my dad had. His work influenced European surgeons for centuries. So how is that even possible that this guy found a method how to remove bladder stones? We're talking about 936 AD to 1013 AD. Over 200 surgical tools, many still used today in our medical field. So that's Al-Zahrawi. And then Ibn Sina, from 980 to 1037, medical textbook before Vesalius. His canon of medicine was used in European medical schools for 500 years, influencing figures like Andreas Vesalius and William Harvey. Described contagious disease, quarantines, and role of the heart in blood circulation before European counterparts. Okay. The last one in medicine that I found fascinating, Ar-Razi, 854 to 925, differentiated, ready for this? Smallpox and measles before Europeans. First to distinguish smallpox from measles, centuries before English physician Thomas Sydenham, advocated for evidence-based medicine and clinical trials. So these, the only three, Al-Zahrawi, Ibn Sina, he's very famous, and Al-Razi. Those are the one of many that I highlighted the impact of their research, of their discovery in medicine alone that we know it today. Go ahead, Ihab. What do you think? What did you feel when you discovered this, or how do you feel when you hear this?
Well, it's fascinating because I'm not in medicine, but you're more into kind of the medical field, the dental field. So you would be more in tune with it, but it's amazing to hear about, Ibn Sina, Zahrawi. You look at it and you say, okay, for instance, Ibn Sina had, he distilled essential oils and had a purification of substances to make medicinal products. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's really interesting because, nobody was doing that kind of purification and creating these medicines from the different chemicals. It kind of goes back to chemistry, but again, it's more of the medicine, and Al-Zahrawi with his, this is something you're really in tune with, Slava, Dr. Slava, is the chemical methods of sterilization and, of course, wound healing. These are things that are chemical methods of sterilization. We still use that now. Obviously we've advanced it. We're using maybe different chemicals for sterilization, but these are ideas, methods of being clean, basically, before surgeries. If you look at the Europeans when they were doing surgeries, they were just going in. They never sterilized their until they learned how to sterilize, but they never sterilized their I won't even call them scalpels. It'd be just knives they would use, things like that. Very, very rudimentary instruments.
No, I agree 100% because there are two things, right? As Europe was decimated, like I said, with the plague, the Islamic world was fine because we had running water, we had sewage system, we had hospitals, we had medical schools, we had sterilization methods, we had the knowledge to differentiate between viruses and bacteria, right? And we have the medicines for it too, right? So that's number one. Number two, there's nowhere in history that I ever read that a Islamic ship went to an uncharted territory and brought in disease, like when the European came to the West Indies, the Caribbeans, the North and South Americas, right? They brought all that disease. The disease was in the blankets. And when they gave the blankets to the natives, they spread disease. Those the Polynesian, the Samoans, right? They never seen disease because they were very isolated in their own world. The disease came from the ships of the Europeans because of the low levels of sanitation, where the Islamic world were a pioneer. They were ahead of the world with sanitation and health and purification and cleanliness and hygiene. So that is the difference between the two worlds and how advanced one world was compared to the other. So that to me is fascinating. But like I said, in Saudi, we learned all that. And to us was like, yeah, it's not a big deal. We know we did it, but talking to Ihab, who grew up here and had the American education, Western education, when I came here, I already had the knowledge. I already had that confidence and validations like, yeah, that's what we did, right? And then it fascinated me when I met Ihab and also my younger brother and sister who were educated here in the United States from, I think, 8th grade or 6th grade on. They had no idea that this exists unless you guys Google it. So let's move on to the scientists, because we want to tap into Ihab's passion, mathematics and algebra, Ihab. So Al-Khwarizmi. Have you heard of him before we ever talked about him?
Never.
Okay.
I didn't even, when I did my research, I did my research on the chemistry and, physics. But if you have some information, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so mathematics and algebra, Al-Khwarizmi 780 to 850, influenced European algebra and algorithm, developed algebra as an independent discipline centuries before European mathematicians, introduced systemic solutions for linear and quadratic equations, which his book is Kitab al-Jabr,
There we go.
and while Muqabbala, influencing European scholars like Fibonacci, introduced Hindu Arabic numerals to the West, which later replaced Roman numerals. So the numbers that we're using today in everything was created by Al-Khwarizmi. The other one is Omar Khayyam, very, very famous. To me, he is 1048 to 1131 cubic equations before Cardano, classified cubic equations and solved them geometrically, anticipated later European advancement by Girolamo Cardona in the 16th century. So we're talking about 1048 to 1131. The West did not get to it until the 16th century. What do you think, Ihab?
Again, it's amazing that none of this was taught to us in school. I would have loved to learn it just to be, this is great. The history of, algebra or some parts of math, it's, all you hear about is, Fibonacci and the Fibonacci sequence in math. And you never hear that, there's a precursor, a predecessor to that. No, so it would have been nice to know, like, where the Europeans built their knowledge upon. Right. So,
why is that important to you as a scientist?
Because I like to know the origin of the work, because when we as scientists do any kind of research, you go into other, research journals and you look back and you just keep going back in time till you find the original piece of research that has to do with what you're working on at the time as a graduate student. So, for instance, when I was working on metals and surfaces, we didn't just look at the last 20 years. We went back to the original surface scientists, back in the early 1900s, and looking at how they kind of looked at, how surfaces interact with the atmosphere, or any kind of chemicals you put on a surface. So it's really nice to go back to that original. And sometimes when you're actually doing some research, you might have to not only go to the most recent kind of article, you might have to go back to the original article that was written that is kind of, you'd say, this person is the father of this kind of surface chemistry. And you'd have to put it in your references in what you're writing. It's kind of nice to have to reference all those people and all those scientists that preceded what your work is and what you're using to, in reference to your work. It's nice to have all those, journal articles in there.
Do other scientists, think like that? Like you think that this is...
Yeah. So you have to give the credit. So you can't just say, I'm going to go back 10 years. I'm just going to give credit to this person that, I'm building on his kind of idea, and I'm coming up obviously with a new idea, but I'm kind of building on that. But then you have to say, well, if you're giving that person you're referencing that person, and you go in that person's article, right? That you're reading that article of theirs, in the journal articles, they probably reference somebody before them. And you would look at those references sometimes and read those articles. And in those articles that maybe 30 years past, you would go back and say, and they'd reference somebody else. So it just keeps going back in time. And it's nice to have that. And sometimes those seminal like articles, those really important articles, they could be 50, 60 years old, and everybody references them in their journal article. It doesn't matter that it's, 50, 60 years old. That person is the person that came up with how, this chemical interacts with the surface, so it's, most scientists do that.
So Yusuf and I, we did a episode about Palestinian intellect, and we touched very, very lightly on some of the key cultural and socioeconomical factors that help them develop an unlimited mindset by eliminating limited beliefs in order to advance and to have the drive and steadfastness to pursue education and knowledge. Let's turn to Ihab. Can you just go through the different, what do you think the reasons behind their mindset in order to achieve that much knowledge?
And so the mindset of whom to achieve what knowledge? I'm sorry.
So the mindset of these Arab scientists and Arab discoveries, what kind of mindset that they have in order for them to be that much advanced than anybody else? Why are they so driven to knowledge? And I mean, that's really advanced.
I'm gonna kind of take it to the religious part, because in Christianity back then, it was frowned upon, right, to look at science or kind of question God, right? You can't say, so one of the big things was the Earth was the center of the universe, and it really isn't, right? So it's just a planet. But if you said it was the center of the universe, that's sacrilege. They can execute you for that.
Yeah.
Okay. On the opposite side, Islam, this is very interesting. And I learned this, growing up, that Islam really promoted people, to think freely and become scientists and really think about, how the world works, how the body works. And it's a different, Dr. Slava, I think you can probably touch on that, because you really learned a lot about the religion in school.
It fascinates me to talk to you about, and we talk about this all the time, constantly, because your upbringing was different. Yeah, your household was very typical Arab, Egyptian, with the discipline of structured religion, just like Islam. But you are more a scientist than you are spiritual. And I am more spiritual than I am into science, because I believe that spirituality opens up our hearts and our mind to accept the logic and the knowledge. But I agree with you, the misconception and the stereotype over Islam that it is just a one way of life. But when you look at these evidence and these facts that Islam actually allowed, the Islamic culture and custom and the unlimited mindset helped these scholars to advance so much. If Islam was so limiting and so restrictive, they would have never accomplished what they have accomplished, right?
I agree 100%.
So there is a factor of unlimited mindset, unlimited belief system. And to me, it sounds like they have either separated, practicing Islam, it's just between you and God, and that's what we learn. And then knowledge is very encouraged because advancement is a way of serving God. And that's how we learned it in Saudi. Education, knowledge, researching, finding the truth, basing it on fact. It was always encouraged, even through the Islamic lessons and the Islamic classes in Saudi Arabia. I do agree with you when you have a organized principle that limits you, puts you in a box,
It's
it will
restrictive.
hinder some people from advancing. And I talk to you a lot about that. And I think that's one of the reasons that you don't really follow a certain structured religion, Ihab, because you are purely a scientist.
Yes.
And it's always in the back of your head that I don't want to follow a certain direction, because what if I am limited to look the other way and find more evidence and more facts and more interest that will really satisfy me, which I get it 100%.
Yeah.
I think the majority of scientists are like that.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating, like I said, the concept of mastering an unlimited mindset by eliminating limited beliefs, how Islam encouraged that. Islam really allowed that, which is a misconception and mind probably blowing to some of our listeners listening to us. It's like, hey, I did not know that, but the evidence is there. History doesn't lie, right?
A lot
Facts
of these,
does not lie. Facts does not judge.
I would say Christianity, it was restrictive in the way, again, way back, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. A lot of these scientists, these original scientists back then in Europe, were hiding some of their discoveries. They couldn't talk about it. You can't say the sun is the center of our solar system. It's impossible. Mm-hmm. It's the Earth, right? So saying something like that is problematic. You can't say talk about how the heart works or what. You cannot talk. And I think when they started dissecting bodies, I believe, if I remember correctly, they had to hide that because, opening up a body, taking a heart out to see how it functioned, that was completely,
it was criminal.
It's criminal.
Yeah. In the eyes of the church.
Yeah.
And the church clergy, it was magic. It was witchcraft.
Yeah.
It was a crime. How can you dismantle a body that is made by the divine, by this power? But it is limiting. It is a way of controlling. It is the way of ignoring the importance of finding and importance of knowledge, because that's how we grow. Knowing is growing.
A lot of these scientists that actually advanced, like Da Vinci, for instance, where, he had a lot of images and drawings of the body. The reason why he was allowed to do it is because he had an in with the church and in with, some of the wealthy families, right? So it's funny that it's, when you're kind of have this connection with the church and the way that through some of the wealthiest families in Europe, it almost like covered him and allowed him to do certain things that if he was not associated with some of these families, like the Medici family, he would have been in a lot more trouble. He did get in some trouble, but it was usually kind of, they let him go. It's fine, or tell him, hey, tone it down. Don't talk about this. But it's very interesting. He was the Renaissance of all science. He was one of my favorite scientists of all time. He did some amazing things in math. Some of the inventions he drew were beyond his time, and the drawings of the body were just incredible. It was, and he just, and obviously his art. Well, let's not forget that. So his art, and that's another reason why I think they gave him kind of a little bit of leeway, is because he would paint for the Vatican, for the churches, for the Medici family, who had a lot of financial influence.
Yeah.
So he was given more ability to kind of speak out more than other scientists at the time. And I think in that Renaissance period, during the Medicis, there was a lot more science and a lot more, kind of art that came out of Italy and Europe, which was wonderful. And I think, it kind of paved the way for future scientists in Europe that came after Da Vinci. So, but yeah, if you did anything to a body, for instance, that's sacrilege, right? You're not supposed to, desecrate a body like that. But
that's why midwives were burned at the stake.
Yeah,
because midwives they were a lot more advanced. They were a lot more, had the characteristic to be nurturing and not being barbaric with childbirth. And they can turn a breech baby, which was like a big no-no. If the baby can't be delivered, then the baby and the mother die. Like, don't interfere with God's will. But of course, it's just a way it's a mindset, right? But I'm always wondering, I wonder if Da Vinci actually knew about the Arab advancement in science and arts. And I'm wondering if any of that influenced his career.
I believe so.
Wonder that?
I believe. So the way I see it,
I'm sure he read about it. I'm pretty sure he's very knowledgeable.
It's almost for sure. Like, so Da Vinci was so open-minded, and I believe that we don't know if he read it, but my belief is that the way he thought and what I read about him as a person, he was just like, he would love to absorb knowledge. And I'm almost guaranteeing he probably read a lot of these texts, and just a lot of people may not understand. And I'm going to kind of sum it up here just a little bit, that these Islamic scholars not only preserved the knowledge of ancient Greeks, Persian, Indians, right? They preserved it. They refined it, expanded on it, right? And this approach of experimentation and documentation directly influenced that European Renaissance. So that's why I think that Da Vinci was really influenced during the Renaissance by these writings, because if you preserve ancient writings and build upon it, that's how science gets better and improves, right? That's the only way science gets better and improves. You have to build upon previous science and say, hey, I really kind of look at these previous scientists like Da Vinci, and some of the Arab scientists like Jabir ibn Hayyan. He was the father of chemistry, for instance. So these, it's incredible. I mean, some of these, like the father, being the father of chemistry, he lived between 721 and 815 AD. That's centuries before anybody was looking at it in the Western world. And he actually took alchemy and transformed it into the early form of chemistry. Because remember, alchemy originally was, again, a magic, right? You're going to turn lead into gold.
Herbology, naturopath,
Well, that's the thing. So you have that really.
And also, don't forget, I think Da Vinci did travel a lot. He did go to Asia. He did, remember that documentary we watched about him together? I had no idea. I mean, I knew he traveled through Europe, but I'm sure his knowledge, his approach to science, his approach to art was influenced by, ancient knowledge and Eastern knowledge too. But since Ihab is a chemist, I would like to celebrate Jabir ibn Hayyan. You just mentioned him.
Yes. Amazing.
From 722 to 815, laid the foundations of modern chemistry, developed key chemical processes such as distillation, crystallization, and sublimation, which were later refined by European chemists, introduced sulfuric acid, nitric acid, and hydrochloric acid, which became fundamental in chemistry.
Of course, this is before even Roger Bacon and Albertus Magnus they were using these techniques of distillation and crystallization, sublimation, filtration. It's amazing. I mean, the other thing is I'm looking at the span of years he lived. This gentleman, back in the year 700, I want to say he almost lived 100 years, right? 721 to 815, correct?
Yeah. Well, we said about that, right? There is hygiene.
That's amazing. Yeah, your
there's
lifespan back
medicine.
then. Yeah.
Yeah, medical schools. There is running water. There is cleanliness. Like I said, there our houses. The way we built, like ancient Egyptian, was rocks and mud. It wasn't straw. Nothing leaked. It was sealed. So it was a lot healthier environment because of the knowledge and because of the advancement that they had. But we are coming close to the end of our hour, and I want to ask you, Ihab, that so it is definitely an unlimited mindset that drives, but why do you think Arabs have this fascination and the passion for knowledge? Why is that? What makes us so passionate about knowledge and advancement?
So I want to say that I really want to say, so Arab pre-Islam, there must have been something there that they really wanted to kind of, that people wanted to learn. But in Islam, it allowed you to expand and learn and think outside the box, you can't say, oh, God doesn't exist. Obviously, you can't say things like that, but you really can be a free thinker in the Islamic world. And that's why the golden age lasted, I want to say 700, 800 years.
800 years. Yep.
Yeah. In science and math and it's spectacular. I mean, for instance, we're talking about Copernicus, and he's the one, an European that came up with that the sun is the center of our solar system. My God, that was a big deal. That's a big deal, but that came, that was influenced by, it was a precursor by Arab scientists by a couple hundred years. Al-Tusi was his name. And he worked on the physics and astronomy and influenced Copernicus's heliocentric theory. So it's that I want to say the restriction of religions, are what or allowed you to expand your mind. So the restriction of Christianity back, at that time and Islam at that time, if we took them at the same time in the year 800, 900, they were one was very restrictive and telling them, hey, you can't do that. You can't talk about that. The other part, Islam says, hey, it's good. Learn, expand your mind. And I think that's why, a lot of these scientists really, it exploded. And that unlimited mindset really was there from the beginning. And I think the stage was set by the religion at the time.
Yes, because I do agree with you 100% because what we were taught in school in Saudi, in order to appreciate God's creation and in order to reinforce your faith in God's ability to create, is to learn more and discover more. When you learn more and discover more, you are advancing yourself. And that is one of so many ways to show gratitude to God's creating and putting these things in front of you and given to you as resources in order to improve your lifestyle, improve your mind, improve yourself spiritually. So it's almost like it was given to us as a duty. Is it our duty to constantly discover, constantly learn, constantly acquire a higher level of education to help others, to help our family, to help our country, to help our community? But the only way to do that, and that's one of the many things that is fascinating and beautiful about Islam, is it has that essence of don't limit yourself. Right. Sky is a limit. God is not going to limit to you because guess what? God created everything. If God created everything, why would he limit you of discovering it? He created everything. So your duty is to discover it because it's already there. You're not discovering something that God did not create. And as a result, you're defying God's will of creation. We don't create anything. We're just discovering, and it's already there. So the history, the civilization, the material, the chemistry, the physics, the laws of nature, if God created all these, go ahead and discover it. It's unlimited amount of creation that God has made, and all you need to do is discover it. So there is a sense that you're not competing with God, you're not going against with God, but if you have that limited belief that God created things in a limited way, and you are discovering above and beyond that limitation, yeah, I can see it coming back at you and says like, no, you're defying God. God has, a limit. But Islam teaches us that God has unlimited ability to create however, whenever, whatever. And your duty towards your faith, because the more you discover, the more you become a believer in God's ability to create. So that's the message that we were constantly been taught, and they were harping on that in Saudi. My life in Saudi is a bittersweet kind of experience, but there was a lot of the fundamental values that I live on these days, and I'm sure from just talking to my friend, things have changed.
Right.
So, Ihab, we are coming to the end of our hour. If you would like a message or some kind of a story just to share with our listeners before we end our episode.
I would like to kind of wrap this up and kind of conclude with saying, these Arab and Islamic scholars, that pioneered science and chemistry, set the stage for later European discoveries, right? So their emphasis on the empirical research, your systemic kind of, or systematic experimentation, documentation, transformed scientific inquiry. Without these contributions, the European Renaissance and the advancement of modern science would have been significantly delayed. So what I really kind of want to hit home for our listeners is that, if these Islamic or Arab scientists did not advance science the way they did, I would believe, I agree that this European science would be delayed by quite a bit, by maybe hundreds and hundreds of years. They would have gotten to it, but it would have been a while. And of course, then we would be delayed right now, right, in our modern times. So, it's a wonderful thing that they were there, and they were precursors to help advance Europe and during that European Renaissance time. And this is where we are now. We're in our modern science, computers and internet, and it's a wonderful thing that this happened.
Yeah, speaking of that, I just found this. Al-Jazari, it's 1136 to 1206. I'm just going to leave my listeners with that fact. Precursor to robotics, created early mechanical clocks and humanoid automata, influencing later European designs, designed water-powered machine and pumps still in use today. So I agree with you 100%, Ihab. So every time, guys, you pick up your iPhone, you open your laptop, you're watching TV, you're driving your car, remember, this technology is based on, and these advancements were based on Arab Islamic scientists that contributed impactfully on our technology these days. Thank you so much, Ihab, and join us next time. And thank you everybody that actually tuned in and listened. This is Chatting with Slava the Jordanian, a podcast part of the Mindset Mastery Moments. And we are uploading an episode once a week, every single Wednesday. So please leave us any questions, comments, suggestion, anything that you would like to talk about or you would like us to tell story about, because this cannot happen without you guys. And just remember, all our episodes are available on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and they are available for you to listen to and watch whenever and wherever you are. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you guys join us next time. Bye now.
Bye-bye. Thanks.